Welcome back to Think's course on scaling your AI startup in under 6 weeks. My name is Johnny. I'm a growth partner here at Thinkk, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Today, we're going to talk about the ultimate step, the final step, the thing that you've been working for all of this time, all the way from when you first thought of your original business idea to the point where you got your first customer, to the point where you went ahead and grew to a really large company, to the point where you scaled into other markets, and then finally you're looking to exit your business. And so for many founders, this is the actual end goal. And it's the time that they can finally cash out on the equity that they've been working so hard to build. This is an amazing step. And if you've managed to make it here, congratulations. You've done an amazing job for yourself. So today we're going to talk about a few things. First one is, how do you actually value your company when you go to sell it? Second one is, how do you actually find a buyer? And the final thing is just, how do you actually time this stuff up to make sure that you're doing a good job on this? But before we get started, know a couple different things. And the first thing we want you to know is that it's important to understand the source of your credibility whenever you're talking to somebody or whenever you're getting information for somebody. And so on my side, I have over a decade of experience launching, advising, growing, investing in different firms and different businesses, and most recently a lot of different AI startups. On Thinkk side of things, we've advised over 45 different AI startups in the last year, in 2024. And so everything that you're going to be learning is coming from data-driven insights and really proven strategies that have worked really well. Here's the big exit paradox that we all like to talk about here. When you actually go to sell your company, it becomes very difficult. And you might think that this is going to be an easy thing, but a lot of times when you do build a company, it's just like building a baby. It's like building a family member, something that's so close to you. And you put a lot of time and effort and dedication into this, and you're not exactly sure if this is the next step. So the thing, which is what we call the exit paradox, is that the same passion and dedication that it actually takes to build a business is the same thing that actually blinds you to kind of being able to sell this thing longer term. So it's actually an amazing thing. But the other thing that's important to notice here, which is really important, is that nobody ever really got wealthy off a salary. You typically would pay your overhead with a salary. You can make a few $1,000,000. I mean, if you were really, let's say, like a corporate CEO at Apple or something, then I could understand how you're getting some sort of wealth accumulation from a salary. But the vast majority of millionaires and billionaires have actually gotten their wealth from equity. Okay, so it comes from owning equity, owning assets, and finally knowing when to go ahead and cash it out. And so this is the exit paradox. And now let's kind of dive into, how do you actually time up your sale here? Because this isn't exactly that easy of a concept. The first thing that you want to look at when it actually comes down to timing your sale is asking yourself a very genuine question of, does my business actually show peak performance right now? And in order to kind of understand this, you look at, do you have a proven business model? Do you have predictable growth? Do you have 2 years of consistent financials? Is your team running the show? If your business is not 100% optimized and showing peak performance, you may want to double guess yourself as to whether or not right now is the time to sell. Because being able to show peak performance is what tells you that, hey, I have maximized the value of my company, and I think I may be ready to go ahead and pass this off to another buyer. This is a really important thing. So make sure that your business is hyper optimized, ultra efficient, and that you've done everything you can to go ahead and do that to actually maximize the valuation that you're going to get from your company. The second thing that you might actually take a look at, though, is even though your business is showing some sort of peak performance, you may actually want to be looking out for, hey, is this actually a local maximum? Or is this maybe the maximum valuation that I'm going to get, at least in the short term? Because perhaps there's some sort of plateau signals I'm going to have to figure out here. Maybe one of them is actually some sort of new competitor is entering your market, and you know they have really deep pockets. They're seriously investor backed. They have a lot of money to throw around. And maybe if they really wanted to, they could afford to just take losses on customer acquisition for 3, 4, 5 years to buy out the market space. And so if you are going to be entering that sort of situation, it may be something to go ahead and consider. Maybe one of the plateau signals actually doesn't even come from your company, though, or doesn't actually come from your competitors. Maybe it just comes from the overall economy. And so maybe you're looking ahead and saying, hey, I really don't have very high hopes for the economy in the future here. I'm looking at some things with interest rates, which are kind of scaring me. And I don't know what mergers and acquisitions activity is going to be like in the next maybe 2 years. And so maybe right now becomes a good time to go ahead and do that. And so the first step is understand that your business is running as efficiently as possible and that you've actually maximized the value that you've gone ahead and created. The second step is, hey, even though I've gone ahead and maximized this, is there a possibility that here in the next little bit, we actually do see the business potentially plateaus, either from a customer, from a competitor, or some sort of other thing that's happening in the marketplace, potentially even some sort of economic crisis that might be coming down the road. The last thing that you want to go ahead and do here is actually ask yourself if you're personally ready. And keep in mind, this is actually the most difficult step. And although 1 and 2, for example, your business performance and any sort of plateau signals can come from other people, Number three actually needs to come from you. And you have to ask yourself the question if you're emotionally ready to let go, if you have a clear vision for your next chapter, if you know what you're going to do with all the money you're going to go ahead and get. Are you going to move to the Amazon and go study philosophy or religion or something? Figure out what you're going to do and make sure that you're personally ready for this. Because if you are not, again, you're not going to be able to go ahead and sell your company. And the people that you're trying to sell this stuff to are going to kind of understand that you're not serious about it. So when you do finally go ahead and actually decide to sell your company, even though most people think that you just kind of sell and walk away, that's not really the way that things typically work. It does work like that sometimes, though. And so the case where it does look like that is something that we call the full exit. In other words, you sell 100% of your company, typically for cash, and you just walk away. There's nothing else that happens there. But as a result of taking that cash and walking away completely, you're typically also going to be getting the lowest valuation out of any other sale method that you could look at. If you don't want to sell 100% of your company, however, you may look at potentially selling some of it. And so maybe this is selling the majority, or at least, maybe up to 80% of your company, and holding on to a slight minority stake in the firm. And what this allows you to do is cash out some of your equity, de-risk, while also participate in some of the future growth of the firm. And so a lot of founders actually like to take this route so that they're not completely walking away from their baby, but at the same time, they do manage to cash out a lot of the equity and a lot of the value that they managed to create. Another one of the options, though, that we tend to see is actually selling your company not to just anybody, and maybe not walking away with selling 100% of it, or selling maybe 50%, but actually just going ahead and selling to your employees. And one of the ways that you can do this is actually through employee stock option ownership plans. And so these are called ESOPs. And as a genuine concept, what you're allowing to do in this case is letting your employees continue to run the show. You say, hey, you've been with me all this time. Even though I no longer want to be with the company, I want to make sure that you guys who went ahead and built this company over time are actually able to continue to run this thing and continue to take this thing to the next level. And so that's another really great option, actually. And I've actually had really great success selling some of my businesses to some of my most prominent employees that really, again, as we kind of talked about before, always believe that your company is worth quite a bit. So whereas you might go to an investor and say, hey, I want 10 million for the company, and the guy turns around and says, yeah, I'll give you 3 or 4 or 5. Your employees typically have a very good understanding of what the company is worth. They've been involved in it. They've been in the trenches. They know how it works. And so they have a very good understanding, and also typically believe that the company is worth more than whatever somebody else says it is. Another option here is actually what we call the strategic sale. And so in this case, what you're doing is potentially selling to a competitor or a supplier or somebody else who sees some sort of strategic value in knocking you out of the marketplace. One of the ways that you might do this is actually look at your competitors and say, hey, if you guys were to take me out here, what sort of gains would you have? And typically there are quite a few gains, not only from actually being able to take over your technology and all the things that you've managed to build, but also just from eliminating you from the marketplace, because now you open up all these different customers that need some sort of new option, or can go ahead and just actually become a part of the other firm. And so there's actually a lot of value here, or strategic value, that a company might end up getting just from being able to acquire you. So this is another really important path. The final one that we typically look at when it comes down to selling, something that we just call the private equity path. And typically this is just selling to some sort of PE firm. They'll come in, they'll grab your company, they'll sit there and ball it up with all their other companies, and eventually they try to go ahead and sell this thing for even more down the road, or potentially IPO. And so this is another way to do it. And typically some of the private equity firms actually do let you walk into what we call that sort of partial exit, where you are able to actually control some of the firm for that second bite of the apple whenever they do sell the second half. Please excuse the numbering here because the numbering is not correct. But what we're going to look at now is actually how to value your business, right? So you've decided to sell the company. Maybe you say, hey, I want to go ahead and get rid of this. I'm personally ready. My business is really running super well, but I do think that the economy might potentially be slowing down in a couple of years from now. Or maybe there's some sort of competitors coming into your marketplace. You have some sort of idea of how you're going to sell it and what you're going to sell it to. And so now it just comes down to actually valuing the company. In other words, asking yourself the question of, okay, I'm ready to sell, but how much do I actually sell this for? And so what this is going to come down to is just how much is your company actually worth? And keep in mind, your company is going to be worth different amounts to different people, and actually is also going to be worth different amounts depending on maybe the valuation method or the form of valuation that you go ahead and take on this. So one of the most common forms of valuing a company, or of any asset really, is just going to be looking at the earnings of that asset. And so in other words, what does this asset actually go ahead and produce? And what it ends up producing is going to be that bottom line. It's going to be that multiple of earnings, or that earnings. And so what you're doing here in valuing your business is saying, hey, my company generates, let's say, $1 million per year in EBITDA. So earnings before interest, tax, blah, 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 blah. And basically what you're looking to do is figure out, okay, what is the multiple that I can get of here? In other words, my company generates this year. it'll probably generate something similar next year. It'll generate something similar the next year. And people that are buying your company know this. And so you can go ahead and just basically sell your company or value your company based on a multiple of the actual earnings that your company produces. And depending on the company and depending on the niche and depending on the industry and a few other things, you're looking at different multiples here. So if you're looking at something like medicine, okay, and you're looking at a hospital system or you're looking at healthcare, a lot of the times you can actually get 10 or 12 or maybe even 14 times your earnings, depending on how sturdy and how long term an investor or a buyer might see that business actually going on for. If you're looking at a marketing firm, you might be able to sell for maybe somewhere around 4 times your earnings, depending on where exactly your EBITDA stands. In other words, the valuation or the multiple that you're going to get if your company is doing 100 grand a year is going to be very different from the multiple that you're going to get, even for the same marketing firm, if it were doing, let's say, $1 million a year. And so it's just something else to consider. But just going ahead and valuing your business based on a multiple of earnings tends to actually be a pretty decent way to do it. Another way that we go ahead and do this, and again, you can value any asset like this, is with something called a discounted cash flow model. And so what you're doing here is not just saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and just look at my earnings and just put some sort of, basic multiplier on this to figure out, okay, what the valuation of my company might be. But what you're actually doing is saying, hey, I understand more or less now what my company is going to generate. I have pretty good past performance here, and I can reasonably predict what I believe is going to be the next year and the following year and the third year after that, as far as what this company is actually going to produce, what cash flow this company is going to generate. And so what you're basically doing with a discounted cash flow model is basically saying, hey, I know what the company is going to produce next year. I know what it's going to produce the following. I know what it's going to produce the following. You add a slight growth multiplier to that on a yearly basis, at least to account for inflation and maybe a little bit of growth. And then what you're actually doing is discounting those cash flows back into the present tense. And so it's basically just a fancy way to say that we are taking the cash flows that a company is going to producing for the rest of its lifetime and actually bringing them back into present day and then valuing them today and then saying, hey, this is the valuation of our company. And the way that you discount those cash flows, by the way, is typically going to be at whatever the interest rate is, plus some sort of, let's say, risk premium or some sort of risk multiplier that goes into it. And so again, this isn't as complicated as it sounds. And it's another way that you can value not only your business, but really any asset that you work with, ranging from like Apple all the way into a real estate purchase. Another way that you can actually go ahead and value your company here is just going to be based on valuing the assets itself. Okay. So every company, or not every company, but most companies actually do have some sort of assets that live on their balance sheet. That might be digital assets. That might be IP. That might be actual physical assets. And so you can imagine if you owned, a landscaping company like one of my friends, Neil, does. Well, Neil goes ahead and Neil owns all these different things. He owns trucks and he owns lawnmowers and he owns all these different assets that can go ahead and actually value the company on, because typically whoever is buying your business is also going to be buying the assets that come with that. If you owned a real estate company, well, you could go ahead and pretty much just value the entire company based on, okay, what is the value of all the assets that I hold? And so if you own 10 different buildings, you own 10 different multifamily properties, you can go ahead and value each one of those assets and say, okay, fine, the overall company is going to be worth XYZ. And so this is another really interesting way to do it. But again, it's not always going to be the best option for maybe AI startups. And the reason is that the actual asset valuations may not be there. This is typically going to be a better reserved method for companies that either have a lot of IP, a lot of digital assets they can go ahead and sell, or some sort of physical asset plays, again, like real estate or maybe trucking or lawn care or something else like that. Another way to actually go ahead and value your business, though, keep in mind that, again, there are a few different ways to do this, is actually with strategic value. And so basically what we're referring to here is saying, we're not looking at the actual earnings, okay? We're not looking at discounting the cash flows back in time. We're not looking at what the asset might actually be worth, but what we're actually looking at is saying, hey, I wonder what this specific value is to a niche buyer or to a specific buyer. And basically what we're doing is saying, hey, if this buyer were to come and take us out today, what sort of synergies would they be able to come and get in their company by combining people? And so, in other words, one of the ways that you might look at this and say, if I have one company and I go ahead and add another company in, I now dramatically increase the size of this company. But as a result, I may be able to negotiate, let's say, better interest rates, or I may be able to negotiate a better liability policy or a better insurance policy and all the rest. And so, in being able to go ahead and actually generate that extra size and also not having to compete with other competitors, you can actually go ahead and create very strategic value for a unique individual. And so this is the way that you can actually go ahead and value this, is you can say, hey, I think that if you were to go ahead and acquire us, we know that you're going to save, let's say, $8 million a year on your insurance premiums. And so we're not asking for the entire 8 million, but we are asking for, some sort of percentage of that. And so again, that just relates down to the strategic value to a certain individual. And so it's important to remember that each one of these methods and each one of these valuation techniques is going to give you a slightly different value. And again, the valuation of your company is going to be slightly different depending on the way that you go ahead and value it, as well as who you end up selling it to. And so the best way to go ahead and actually value your company as a general concept here is just going to be actually valuing them by all means. Okay. So you're going to value them first as a multiple of earnings. You value your company as discounted cash flow. You look at what the asset valuation is, and then you finally look at and see what could be the strategic value given the synergies that a buyer might actually be able to enjoy by acquiring my firm. And then you look at those four methods, then you say, okay, fine, this is the lower end, this is the higher end. And then you can go ahead and kind of play with the numbers, but you get some sort of ballpark figure there and ideally try to sell somewhere within that range, if not higher. Let's go ahead and actually talk about the buyer hunt now. Okay. So, where do you actually find the buyers that you're trying to find? The first one is just going to be your professional network. And this is actually the most common one, with around 60% of all sales actually just going to somebody that people already knew within their network. So, this is a pretty reasonable approach. And it's also the easiest to do because you already know these people. If you do not know those people, though, and if those people who you're looking to purchase your company are not actually within your professional network already, what you can go ahead and do is actually go ahead and recruit like an industry matchmaker. And so what these companies will do is say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and pair you up with a buyer. Okay. They keep long buyers lists, and they're typically pretty niche down. So one of my friends, for example, owns a firm that works specifically in garages and housing and roofing and things of that nature. And so any sort of company that tries to get sold around there, he has all the buyers for it, and he can go ahead and put people in touch. But in exchange for those services, they do typically ask for maybe 5 or 10% of the firm of the sale value in order for facilitating those services. And so depending on what your valuation might be, this might be a lot, this might be a little, but typically as your valuation ends up going up, the percentage of that valuation they're going to ask for is actually going to decrease. The final option here is typically for finding a buyer, it's going to be fairly straightforward. It's just going to be some private equity firms. There's a lot of private equity firms. And again, a lot of these firms just go ahead and roll up a ton of different firms into some sort of portfolio. They aggregate them, they get those synergies, they get those efficiency gains. And then eventually they either try to sell that firm and realize some sort of profit on their investment, or they try to IPO or do something else here and eventually exit. And so that's another really great way to go ahead and find a buyer. Remember, though, that in the vast majority of cases, you are not just going to say, hey, I'm signing this deal and then I'm all of a sudden walking away tomorrow and going to the Amazon rainforest, right? Like maybe that happens in some cases, but it's not typically the most usual option. And so when it does come down to actually going ahead and selling your company, there typically is going to be some sort of transition phase. And you can understand why this makes sense, because somebody who's buying your firm or going ahead and getting involved recognizes how much value you actually contributed to the firm already. And you recognize that, hey, you were leading this company for a long time, and I need you to kind of walk me through how you did that, at least for the next little bit. And so typically there's a transition phase of 1 or 2, or maybe even up to 5 years, where the existing people, the existing leadership, the existing teams are really asked to stay on and continue to run the company in this sort of handover period. And so the first thing that you want to do within this transition phase is you need to document all of your operations. You want to say how you do things and why you do things, and more or less leave like a blueprint for the next generation of employees and the next generation of leaders to continue to run your firm. You also want to prepare your team and let them know that, hey, we are selling this company. I'm no longer going to be, let's say, running the show anymore. However, I do want you to stick around. It's important. Nothing is going to change. I want to make sure that things go well for you. And so you do want to prepare your team and let them know exactly what they're going to be walking into. You also want to create any sort of handover procedures, in addition to going ahead and just planning customer communication and letting people know that, hey, I am no longer going to be the person that actually fulfills the service anymore. It's still the same company. I appreciate you being there with me for all this time, and I'm going to make sure that you're still in good hands, even though it may be a different last name or a different person who is actually running the show in the future. The last thing you want to do is just go ahead and structure some sort of leadership transition so that the new CEO knows exactly what they're doing. They know when they're going to be stepping into the role. You have some sort of consistent handover of those leadership and other responsibilities, and that way the company's performance and the company's overall operations don't take any sort of hit, even though you may no longer be involved in the firm to the same extent. If you are looking to exit, if you want to value your company, if you're looking for some sort of buyer, go ahead and get in touch with us. Go ahead and book a one-on-one workshop over at Thinkk.com, and we'll help you figure out any sort of questions that you have regarding that process. If that is not the right step for you, however, I will also leave some sort of educational materials somewhere around here, maybe in the bio, maybe in the description or somewhere there, so you can also continue to learn at zero additional cost to you. Again, completely free. Thank you very, very much for finishing this course with us and finally reaching this amazing step of your startup journey. This is the step that every startup founder wants to get to. And if you do manage to get here, think a little bit and take some time and go ahead and enjoy yourself. You've had a long, long journey. You've done amazing things so far. You've obviously about to go ahead, if not already, realize the sort of value that you managed to create. And I commend you on being able to build such an amazing firm. So, congratulations on your really, really hard work. Congratulations on potentially looking to sell here. And if you need any sort of help, you know where to get in contact with us. Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate you letting me go ahead and give you guys this sort of lessons. It means a lot, and it's really, really cool to me to be able to share everything that I've learned, as well as everything that we learned on Thinkk side of things for the next generation of amazing entrepreneurs. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. Bye-bye.